What a perfect segue, actually, where the music changed there. This is WDNA 88.9 FM and WDNA.org. And this is the Frost Jazz Hour that comes to you every Thursday at 11 a.m. And what a privilege and an honor it is that we have Associate Director of Horn and Brass and Program Director at the Frost School of Music, Richard Todd. Richard has a vast experience playing, recording with a vast number of artists, playing in jazz clubs, concert halls. He's performed among artists such as Aerosmith, Madonna, Whitney Houston, Michael Jackson. I mean, really, the list goes on.
Paul McCartney.
We started today's show with Rhapsody for Horns by Craig Russell. And we're going to transition off into another tune. But before we do, good morning. How are you? Let's turn up that mic.
Good
One more
morning.
time. There we go.
Hey.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
It's such a privilege and honor to have you on the show today. And as I was reading through all the information and listening to the music, I was so excited to have someone that really is part of both worlds, classical and jazz. And as you're coming in here, I was playing this music and you said, "Isn't this a jazz radio station?"
Well, both art forms to me have always been very, very special, very precious, and I feel like my kind of journey into each of those worlds has made the other world. When I transitioned back, it has made, I think, the other world better because each side has taught me a little bit more about being a complete musician than I would have, at least for me, had I just done only one or the other.
Right. And so how did you manage that? Because for myself, I think of myself as an artist that I go into these little obsession periods.
Mm-hmm.
How was that for you? Did you have one period where you really studied one thing, or was it always kind of interchangeable?
Well, it was pretty much always interchangeable. Even from the time I was in high school, I grew up listening, I think, like pretty much anybody in my generation, I grew up listening to rock and roll and whatever the popular music was of the day. And piano was my first instrument before I went to the horn. And so I got together with a bunch of my buddies in high school and we formed a rock band.
Really?
And yeah, we played covers and dances and so on and so forth. But so I played keyboards and it was fun for me. And as I continued to grow, I started listening to more and more jazz musicians. Of course, keyboard being my real kind of focus. One of my first heroes, kind of in the non-classical world, was Keith Emerson of Emerson, Lake and Palmer. And I grew up with that whole kind of progressive rock era, Rick Wakeman with Yes and Tony Banks with Genesis and so on. But then I started listening to people like Art Tatum and Oscar Peterson.
Oh, lovely.
And it changed my world, and it really turned everything around for me. And so when I was listening a lot to Frank Sinatra, listening to the way that he phrased, thinking, how can I take that and put that in my classical playing and try to loosen it up a little bit. And so I moved. I got a job in New Orleans as a principal horn of the New Orleans Symphony back in the late 1970s. Leonard Slacken was a conductor, and I kept asking around, I think I want to take jazz lessons. Who should I take jazz lessons from? And every single person said the same name, Ellis Marsalis.
Wow.
So I took jazz lessons with Ellis Marsalis for the better part of the 2 years I was living there.
So how old were you around that time?
I was 22.
Okay. So for all the young listeners, it's never too late to start studying something that maybe you don't have experience with.
Exactly right. And I found that the jazz study made my classical playing so much freer. I was listening more, which is something that classical musicians don't automatically do. Classical musicians are really trained to play by sight. They see the notes on the page and they play them. But classical musicians will practice etude books. They'll practice solos. They'll practice orchestral excerpts. They'll practice everything by sight. Jazz musicians will practice without, I mean, they will use method books, of course, to make themselves better, but a lot of the practicing they do will be practicing harmonic riffs or patterns and so on and so forth, and all by ear, all listening to it. And that really changed me a great deal to understand that. And it's something that I'm trying to impart on my own students now and all the classical players, students that I work with at Frost, to get them to really open up their ears and hear more.
Absolutely. So how did that music affect? So I'm looking right now, Richter Scale, which is one of your records. It was released, I'm seeing 1990, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, 1990. So we're going to start with the first tune, Got a Match. But before we head off into that tune, could you tell us a little bit about the process that came about when you were making this record?
Well, yeah. I have my mentor was the late, great Gunther Schuller, who is one of the greatest names in American music in the 20th century. Really just a brilliant mind. And I had sent him a recording because I was a student at Tanglewood. And Gunther decided that he heard a recording of mine that I had sent him. I sent him just a little cassette a year or two after I went to Tanglewood. Just say, hey, just want you to know what I'm doing. There was some classical music on one side, just horn and piano, and then on the other side there was some jazz. This is on a cassette tape. There was some jazz, again, horn and piano kind of duets. Actually, the pianist for my jazz side was my old dear friend Billy Childs, and I sent it to Gunther, and he called me about 6 months later. He said, I finally listened to your tape. I want to be your record producer. I want to produce records with you. So every once in a while, we would come up and do one. My first one I did was an LP called New Ideas, which was classical music on side 1 and jazz on side 2. We did that record in 2 days. And then Richter Scale was the next one. And then that, I believe it took us, I think, 2 days also, maybe 3, to do the whole record.
Wow, that is unheard of.
Well, we just did it. We played live. Everything was live.
Oh, okay, got
And we
you.
recorded it at Mad Hatter, which was Chick Corea's studio. And I knew that if we did it there, we would have a great piano.
What an experience. Again, WDNA listeners, we're so happy and so excited to present this music for you. Here is Got a Match. You are listening to WDNA 88.9 FM, and we are live in the Jazz Gallery, live in the studio with amazing virtuoso Richard Todd telling us about his wonderful life and his musical career, sharing all of that knowledge and his music with us today, again, live in the studio here at WDNA. My name is Nicole Garcia. I'm your host on today's Frost Jazz Hour. Starting at the top of the hour, you listen to Got a Match, which features John Clayton, Billy Childs, and Ralph Penland, who Richard Todd was just telling us about. And you also listen to Au Pourvov, which was arranged by John Carisi. Once again, it's such a privilege and a pleasure to have Richard Todd with us here in the studio today. We'll be back with more music off of the record. What was that record called again? Not Got a Match. Richter Scale.
Frost Jazz Hour is a sponsored presentation of the University.
In a Mellow Tone off of Richter Scale by Richard Todd, who is with us here in the studio today on the Frost Jazz Hour. As a jazz artist, Todd's education came from lessons with Ellis Marsalis, as you were sharing with us earlier for the listeners who were here with us since 11 a.m. And Todd's studio career has spanned over 35 years, included over 2,000 film and television scores. He's been given credit on blockbusters such as Star Trek Into the Darkness, Tomorrowland. And I was also mentioning to Richard about the fact that he was telling us that Frank Sinatra was one of the people that he listened to when you were first getting into jazz. And as I'm reading down the names of all the artists that he's worked with, you know, Frank Sinatra is on that list.
It is. That was just to have been able to have played with people that I grew up listening to. I mean, Sinatra was one. I mentioned that I was a keyboard player in a rock and roll band in high school, and like my influence, like the kind of player that I played most like, was Elton John. And then I got a chance to not only record with Elton but also work with him on the Tonight Show, so I fortunately brought my LP copy of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, and I've got Elton John having autographed my Goodbye Yellow Brick Road record hanging on my wall in my house.
That's so special. So what can you say to maybe any of the listeners or students who are hearing about your career?
I think that first things first, if anybody had asked me when I was at their stage in development if I would have had the kind of career that I've had, I would have never thought that was possible. I just always put the professionals up on such an ivory tower that it was something that I just never felt that I could reach. And clearly, some of that thought process was a little bit kind of, I think, misguided, not because of how I felt about it, but because of how other people felt about it. And it's very easy to get a little down on yourself every once in a while, because particularly in this modern age of social media, where everything that you see is all perfect and everybody's happy and it's all great and so on. I just stuck to practicing. I stuck to just focusing on getting better and trying never to compare myself to anybody else. And because inevitably I would probably have ended up on the lesser side of that comparison, and it's not true. If you're a musician, you have a gift, and the gift is, the lucky ones are the ones that actually are able to recognize their gift. The good ones are the ones that recognize their gift and have a passion for it, and the truly successful ones are the ones who recognize their gift, have a passion for it, and a work ethic that won't quit. So keep doing what you're doing, because you may not think very highly of yourself, but I guarantee you other people do, and it will show up in ways that you don't understand. And just keep going, keep believing, because you can make it happen.
So what was your practice schedule or routine like? Because I want everyone to know that as a musician, we work so hard, and I'm sure there were hours that you put into your craft.
Well, it's funny because I like to think about being a musician a bit like being an athlete, particularly when you're in school, because athletes and musicians share something very much in common. Their work begins once they get out of class. And, musicians may not be able to bench press 350 pounds, but I'm not sure that too many athletes can also play The Flight of the Bumblebee on the violin. So it's a trade-off. But yes, we have to really put in a lot of hours, and a lot of hours alone, and really getting deep into critical thinking, critical hearing, and I could keep going, but it's like that. I don't know.
Absolutely. So you heard it here first on the Frost Jazz Hour. We are joined by Richard Todd. We're going to continue today's show with music off of Richter Scale. So we'll be playing the title track again, featuring Richard Todd, Billy Childs, John Clayton, and the wonderful drummer
Ralph Penland.
There we go.
Now, I do want to say one thing. This was actually the first composition of mine that I put down on record.
Amazing. All right. So here it is.
Much better time wise. Yeah.
What a beautiful way to end today's show. You are listening to WDNA's Frost Jazz Hour. That tune is entitled A Time for Love. Richard Todd is with us here in the studio. And on that tune, you also listen to John Clayton, Billy Childs, and Ralph Penland. So remember, folks, here on WDNA, this is a special time because it's a two-part show. So if you want to listen to the second part of the show, make sure that you tune in on October 19th. That's October 19th here on WDNA 88.9 FM. And we have a few more minutes before we close out today's show and listen to BBC News. So again, we're joined by Richard Todd, and I wanted to ask him one more question for all the listeners. Is there any musical obsession that you've been up to recently?
Yeah, I've been really kind of diving into a lot of stuff that I had not been familiar with. It's probably very familiar to people much younger than myself. But I tell you, the two things that I've really found over the last few years that have just really floated my boat more than anything else that I've heard in quite a while is, of course, Jacob Collier.
Oh,
who, of course,
that's
is
awesome.
like he's just like really ridiculous. He's definitely one or two more IQ points than anybody in any room anywhere. But the other one is an incredible group called the Dirty Loops.
Okay.
They are remarkable, and I found them on YouTube, doing covers of tunes by Britney Spears, by Adele, by a few other, just like doing covers, but incredible covers.
One more
these
time,
three,
what's their name?
Dirty Loops.
Dirty
Loops. It's three young men, probably in their mid-30s by now, but they've been doing this for quite a while. It's just keyboards, bass, and drums, and each one of these three are remarkable.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. We have one more time Richard Todd on today's show. Thanks for joining us.
At 88.9 FM,
Sorry,
you're
so you
tuned
wind
to
me up.
WDNA
You wind-
Miami. Public radio redefined.